There's been a topic that I've wanted to cover for a long time on this channel, and I've just never gotten around to it until today, and that is, how much gain do you really need for your guitar? Should it be like this? Or something more like this? Well, the truth is, like most subjective things, it kind of depends. The reason that I wanted to make this video in the first place is I think it's sort of a nuanced topic, and people tend to have their own personal biases on this topic that are primarily informed by their own musical preferences. For example, extreme metal guys will tell you to turn it up as far as it will go, and even use a distortion pedal in front of that if you need to, whereas the more progressive, plucky djent players will tell you to back way off until you have a more or less dry type of distortion. There are some caveats with these things though, and it really has to do with context. You might be able to get a great guitar tone in the room, but then in your mix it sounds super weak and thin, and you aren't sure why. Well, it probably has to do with the amount of gain, or more specifically, saturation, that is not only on your guitar, but in your overall mix. Since saturation is a common tool used by mixing engineers, it can be important to give them enough headroom in your guitar tone so that when they add saturation to your overall mix, it doesn't come at the expense of ruining your guitar tone. On the flip side, you might have a killer mix tone, but when you solo the guitar, it's weak and lacks dynamic expression appropriate for your music. Or there's the context of actually tracking your guitars. You might think that less gain sounds better, but then you dial it back so much that you don't have the sustain needed for those sick pinch harmonics or those string sweeping arpeggios.
And if you were looking for a place to learn sick sweep arpeggios, then allow me to clumsily transition into today's sponsor, Skillshare.
Skillshare is the world's largest online learning platform, and they have thousands of courses brought to you by real-life professionals in their fields. They can teach you all sorts of things like how to cook the world's best boiled egg, draw a portrait of your cat, or more relevant adulting skills like budgeting and using Excel. Wait a second. Probably something I could use. They even have these things called learning paths, which are curated classes that are optimized to take you from beginner to expert in the least amount of time possible. So if you're interested in acrylic painting like me, you could take this acrylic painting class. I also like that the learning path tells you what materials you need, what the final product will be, and what level you should be at before you start the path, and what the total hour of completion is. 9 hours and 34 minutes. Not bad. But then there are sexy skills too that might appeal to this audience more, like classes on marketing your music so that you can finally get that one-man black metal project off the ground. Skillshare is offering the first 500 people that use the link in the description below a month for free, so even if you try it and realize that your solo black metal project is never going to go anywhere, no matter how awesome Skillshare is, at least you didn't waste any of your hard-earned cabbage. I know that sounds weird, but I literally typed in funny words for money into Google and cabbage is what came up. Don't blame me, it's the robots. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna load up a plugin, and I'm just doing this for ease of use. This is actually more extreme with analog gear. When things get converted to plugin format, they tend to kind of lose the range of gain that they have in the analog equipment, but that is a whole conversation for another video. But I have this MLC Sub-Zero Bogren Digital plugin loaded up. Now this is probably more gain than you would like in a mix. But I'm able to hit pinch harmonics really, really easily with it. Let's turn it up to an extreme amount just for sake of conversation. Even easier to hit those pinch harmonics. Now let's dial it back to more of a rhythm setting here. I'm gonna go like the gain at 3. It's like conventional wisdom. They tell you to roll the gain back like that. But I'm really having to work for those pinch harmonics, and they don't have quite the sustain that they used to have. But on the rhythm side of things, a little bit snappier, a little bit drier, a little bit tighter versus, you know, if we have it cranked up. Things start getting a little bit more compressed. The notes start bleeding into each other a little bit. We don't have that same definition that we would if we had the gain rolled back. So, you know, maybe we just split the difference. Now, of course, I am boosting this also, so if we take the boost off of that and then we go back to the amp. This would be the extreme end of the dry, punchy sound. Not very easy to hit those pinch harmonics. Let's just crank the gain all the way up. I think this is a really good amp to demonstrate this with too, just because, you know, there's not a tremendous amount of gain on tap here. But if we boost it, you know, we can get it into that ultra high gain territory. Now, what's the solution here if you want that punchy sound, but you also need to hit those pinch harmonics? Well, there's a couple things. I think when you're tracking, you need to dial the gain into the appropriate amount so that you can hit the pinch harmonic. But then, you know, maybe when you go back and you're doing the final mix, you could dial it back a little bit. You know what I mean? And of course, a lot of this is going to depend on the song and like the energy of the song and whatnot, and what parts there are. Now, you might want your rhythm guitars to be drier, but they might have parts that have squeals that need that extra bit of distortion. And if you wanted to get super technical here in your mix, you can automate these things. But I find that most of the time recording a DI track with the amount of gain that you feel comfortable with recording to get a good take, and then go back and maybe just redo the guitar tone with a little bit less gain, tends to work out quite well. I have Amplitube loaded up here, and so when we're listening to the guitar on its own, that sounds like an appropriate amount of gain to me, but watch what happens when I turn on my bus processing, which has some tape saturation in it. Sort of blows out the top end and makes it a little bit harsh. And that tape saturation is adding to the overall mix. So let's listen to the whole mix with the tape saturation on and off. It's definitely adding something cool to the overall mix, but it's making the guitar tone a little bit harsh. So if we turn down the gain, a little bit less harsh, but if we were listening to this on its own without any bus effects, I would say it's a little bit too dry, but by the time we add that saturation on the bus, it sits really nice in the mix. Okay, let's look at another amp inside of Amplitube, one that probably most people are familiar with. Okay, this is their take on the 5150, and let's listen to just the guitar again. Really, really harsh with the tape saturation on. Kind of harsh without it also. So about 3 is where I would have that red channel, and when we turn the tape saturation on, maybe like 3.5 there, it's starting to sit good. You know, you can hear when we turn it up too much, it gets like mushy. And the distortion gets really like crunchy sound, as emphasized by the tape saturation. Let's go to the green channel, a very underrated channel on the 5150, and we're gonna have the bright switch and the crunch both on. This is what this sounds like on its own. On its own, it sounds okay. A little bit dry, but you know, if you're wanting like some punchy sort of sound, I mean, I think it's appropriate. But then once we get it in the mix, Even with the tape saturation on the bus plugin, it's just too dry. It's not gluing with the drums and the bass. Like, that sounds a little bit better to me, but let's go back to a lower gain setting. So what's the point of all this? The point is that context is really, really important when you're talking about gain. Now, there are other examples I could list too, like your band rehearsal. How much gain should you have in your band rehearsal? How much gain should you have live? And I don't think that there's just a blanket setting that you can use in every situation. All right, I hope you have found this video entertaining, or at least interesting. This is just my take on the subject, and I think that the context really matters when deciding how much gain you need to use in any specific application. I would say that most people tend to overdo it, but the opposite does exist as well. Special thanks to all of the patrons who support this channel over on Patreon. You guys are the best, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.